Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth might be on the chopping block, according to more leaked reports. Is this more of the Pentagon's witch hunt, or is the Pentagon actually in total disarray? I'm Paul, U.S. Army combat veteran. Let's talk about it. Okay, so this is a crazy rumor that was first reported by NPR that the White House is actually looking to can Pete Hegseth as Secretary of Defense. He lasted less than 100 days, if true. But this, of course, is from a U.S. official not authorized to speak publicly, i.e. a leak. And it's because Pete Hegseth, apparently, this second Signals group chat is true. Or at least, again, according to this rumor, that, you get to make you don't get to make that many mistakes in the military, and that's one of my gripes with it. But when you do make a mistake, a lot of good leaders are going to give you a pass as long as you don't make the same mistake twice. Now, by the time you're leading up the Pentagon, your mistakes have to be pretty small because, again, when it comes to conflict, you don't usually get like a do-over if you accidentally start a war. That's too much of a whoopsie. But, for example, communicating classified war plans over Signal is something you only get to do. You don't even really get to do that once if you're a rank and file member of the Pentagon. But if you are a senior official within the Pentagon, apparently you get to do it once. But this time he apparently dropped classified information in a group chat with his wife, brother, and lawyer. You might recall his wife actually also attended a sensitive meeting with foreign dignitaries, meaning that, of course, his wife is almost certainly the target of foreign intelligence, right? Again, if you start bringing unvetted, uncleared, untrained people to these sort of meetings, it's a bad look. I don't know what else to tell you, right? Now, the source reported that Hegseth used Signal on his personal smartphone, detailing minute-by-minute classified information about airstrikes on Houthi targets in Yemen. Right? This happened in March, about the same time he shared details in the Signal group chat. So apparently, so it's possible that he didn't actually make he made the same mistake twice, but he didn't get caught until after the fact, right? Now, the fact that you don't know that pending airstrikes against Houthi targets in Yemen shouldn't be written on a personal smartphone, right, is a massive, massive problem. And one of the things that Ryan Grimm over on Breaking Points pointed out that I thought was a good point is that there are tools called Pegasus that allow foreign intelligence agencies to simply throw an invisible app on a phone and pull data off of it. So even if you were one of those recipients, right, they would almost certainly have had access to that information. Now, if you give the Houthis a couple hours of advance, say if you're an Iranian hacker, you can have them get out of the way. But even more dangerous is the danger to U.S. pilots, right? And this article points out that the Houthis have actually had an immense amount of success taking out U.S. Reaper drones. And we're going to talk about this, why this is so troubling in a second. But first, I want to mention that if you guys are interested in some of the exclusive combat footage coming to us from the front lines, and if you are interested in supporting the channel, right, and joining the elite, the top tier of fan on this site of this channel, you want to do it on combatvetnews.com, right? The truth is, if you've been in the comment section, I see that 90% of you guys are probably real people, but about 10% are Russian bots, and I just can't take the risk of engaging with them. So, right, in terms of my engagement with the fans, it's on Combat Vet News. It's just easier that way. These are the vetted top tier members of the channel. And if you want to join, you get access to a huge 100+ video archive of all the uncensored combat footage that YouTube won't let me show you that goes back to the start of the war. And if you are in the lieutenant and colonel tiers, you get to drop in for the weekly Q&A. So you can ask me questions, submit your questions, and I run through them every single week. I literally answer 100% of questions, or I'll say 99% of questions. A couple times people will submit tech support questions. I don't have to field them off. Obviously, you're not here to see a Q&A on tech support, but we answer questions about my time in Afghanistan, my opinion on the actions of the administration, even on issues that I never cover here. So if you want to support the channel, support me, join that top tier, you want to do it over on combatvetnews.com. The link is in the description. Okay. So here's the thing, right? when asked about it, right, here's what I think is pretty funny. When asked about it, first off, President Trump said that he stands strongly behind Pete Hegseth, and that concerns about leaked U.S. operations and signal is a, quote, waste of time. Trump continued, he's doing a great job. Asked the Houthis how he's doing, Trump said. And I think actually some of the other cope from other administration allies is even funnier. Here's a senator, one of only 100 in the United States, our top tier of leadership, Markwayne Mullin, who, for the record, has never served in uniform ever. He inherited his dad's business, a plumbing business that he inexplicably sold, after he'd been in the Senate for several years, for like millions and millions of dollars, as happens to local plumbing businesses all the time. Mark Wayne says, I will lead the breach. I will lay down cover fire. I will take the high ground. I'll expose myself to enemy fire to communicate. Right? Want to point out, exposing yourself to enemy fire to communicate is the actions of one of the most famous Medal of Honor winners, the Navy SEAL, who, oh my gosh, I'm not that famous, apparently. I think it was Mike Murphy. I keep wanting to call him Mike Mullen. Mike Murphy, right? Michael P. Murphy, U.S. Navy SEAL, killed in 2005 in Afghanistan. That was the action that won him the Medal of Honor, going out onto an exposed ridge to establish communications with his headquarters so that his team had a chance of evacuating, right? So, again, Markwayne Mullin, daddy's plumbing business inheritor, claiming that literally his actions are comparable to those of Mike Murphy, is pretty gross. We must bring back integrity, focus, put the warfighter first inside the DoD. I stand with Pete Hegseth. Okay, if you put the warfighter first, guys, exposing their plans to the Iranians is not putting the warfighter first. It's putting the warfighter at risk, right? And so if your only defenders are rolling out absolute pure cringe, well, we got to ask ourselves some tough questions, right? And again, I think it's worth noting that if you ask the Houthis how they're doing, actually, the Houthis seem to be doing great. In fact, they're getting more wins than they've had in a long time. And while B-2 stealth bombers are hitting Iranian-backed militia in Yemen, the Houthis have taken out 3 MQ-9 Reaper drones, right? And what's interesting about this particular series of events is these MQ-9s were reportedly taken down with Iranian systems like the Sayad 2C and the Sucker, but there's also Russian-made SA-6 missiles, right? And that's really interesting because what appears to be happening is that these drones are being shot down. These drones are not meant to be stealthy. These are meant to operate in environments where there is like an Iraqi insurgency level of sophistication, right? Where there's no surface-to-air missiles. Well, unfortunately, the Iranians are supplying the Houthis with pretty advanced tech, right? Anti-ship ballistic missiles and anti-air systems that are pretty advanced. And what's also worth noting is that the fact that these are Russian-made systems. Remember, guys, we just talked yesterday about how the Russians will forbid the export of military technology, particularly in this time of conflict. They arrested Chinese nationals for exporting a few sets of body armor. And so the fact that these Russian missiles are in the hands of the Houthis likely indicates that the Russian government has granted permission for Iran to purchase these, and almost certainly with the understanding that they were going to be deployed to the Houthis. This is something that we talked about in previous videos, that the administration, again, doesn't seem to understand that the Houthis, the Iranians, the North Koreans, the Russians, and the Chinese are operating together with a level of coordination, right? It doesn't mean that they're all meeting at the same table with Xi Jinping and the Ayatollah smoking cigars, but where their objectives align, they are engaging in cooperation. Meanwhile, the United States, of course, insulting its allies, cooperating with virtually no one, including the Ukrainians. And so it makes sense, of course, that the U.S. would experience some pretty, again, shooting down drones, not a big deal, but unusual to see U.S. aircraft getting downed, even if they are aircraft that are essentially out of date, right? A conventional, slow-moving, fixed-wing, non-stealth aircraft. They're not going to last long on the battlefield, but you'd rather see them not get shot down. Now, and here's where things get even more bizarre. Hegseth seems to be flailing, and really, as we talked about, he's never headed an organization the size and scope of the Pentagon. And that's a huge problem. If you've only ever been like a platoon commander, a platoon leader, if you're in the Army, if you've only ever been in charge of 40 to 50 people, you really don't have the skill set necessary to run something as big as the Pentagon. And what happens when you're in over your head is after a while, you're a little bit like Wile E. Coyote. You run off the edge, you're out over your skis, and if you just keep moving your legs, you hope you keep running. But at some point, you look down, you realize how far over your capacity you are, and then you start to flail, right? And I think his firing of all of his some of his most loyal people is the flailing part, right? This is an op-ed from one of his good friends, John Uliat. And John Uliat, listen to this biography. He was a former chief Pentagon spokesman and led communications at the National Security Council and at the Department of Veteran Affairs in the first term of the Trump administration. He resigned from the Pentagon last week, and he was the senior communication advisor on Trump's 2016 campaign, and he worked with Hegseth at his previous role in a think tank, and he was the communications public affairs chief of the Pentagon for Pete Hegseth. Do you know how bad it is to be the public affairs chief of the Pentagon, to resign in protest and then drop an op-ed about how bad your friend of many decades is? That is, he must have gotten absolutely just fucked. Just totally fucked. Listen to some of his quotes. He says, "It's been a month of total chaos at the Pentagon." Again, this is somebody who resigned in about April 15th is when he resigned. Right? From leaks of sensitive operational plans to mass firings, the dysfunction is a major distraction for the president, who deserves better from his senior leadership. He's getting the leadership he appointed. I don't know what else to tell you. Right? And he literally calls for President Trump has a strong record of holding his top officials to account. Given that, it's hard to see Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth remaining in his role for much longer. Damn, dude. Friendship with John ended. New best friend is Putin, maybe? Right? He says, on Friday, Hegseth fired 3 of his most loyal senior staffers. And in the aftermath, DOD officials working for Hegseth tried to smear the aides anonymously to reporters, claiming they were fired for leaking sensitive information as part of an investigation ordered last month. Uliat himself says none of this is true. The department said it would conduct polygraph tests as part of the probe, but none of the 3 have been given a lie detector test. FYI, guys, polygraph tests don't prove anything. They're inadmissible in court because they're nonsense. They're just a sort of theater. They're pseudoscience, right? You might as well polygraph somebody with a Ouija board. In fact, one of them told former colleagues that investigators advised them that they were about to be cleared of any wrongdoing. And then they were unceremoniously booted out of the Pentagon, right? Now, also, Hegseth's chief of staff, Joe Casper, bailed, who initially requested the investigation into the leaks, including military plans for the Panama Canal and a pause in collection of intelligence for Ukraine. Now, the building, as they say, is in disarray under Hegseth leadership. No shocker there. And, right, this is somebody who, let's take a look here. They talk about bringing conservative media to the Pentagon space, all the good things they've done, in their opinion. Right, last month, after leaving my public affairs role, I respectfully declined the secretary's generous offer for a new position and informed him my decision to leave the department, wishing him the best. Guys, I don't know how else to tell you this. Being a senior staffer at the Pentagon, head of public affairs, deputy undersecretary for policy or communications, those would be career-making assignments. Star professors at my grad school had served as DASDs, Deputy Undersecretary of Defense. These are elite career pinnacle positions. And to have someone like Hegseth offer it to you, and for you to tell them to fuck off must mean that the level of dysfunction must have been insane. Insane, right? So, and he says the last month has been a full-blown meltdown at the Pentagon, right? Obviously, there was Signalgate Part 1, Signalgate apparently Part 2, and we're still... Wall Street Journal reported that Hegseth brought his wife, a former Fox News producer, and two meetings with foreign military counterparts, meaning, i.e., other secretaries of defense, where sensitive information was discussed. Pentagon set up a top-secret briefing with the Joint Chiefs of Staff for Elon Musk, someone who has huge multi-billion-dollar factories in China. Why would you tell Elon Musk about Chinese war plans when he not just wants to, but needs to be in favor with the Chinese? And the Chinese have tremendous leverage over Elon Musk. So if it hadn't been leaked, the White House would have allowed the meeting to occur. Now, here's what else he drops. He says there are very likely more shoes to drop in short order, with even bigger bombshell stories coming this week, key Pentagon reporters have been telling sources privately. Now, I want to point out something he gets kind of wrong here. As he says, Trump holds his team accountable for serious mistakes that occur on their watch. Cabinet secretaries like Jim Mattis, who, by the way, resigned in protest. He did not get fired. He resigned in protest because the Americans were going to withdraw and turn over basically influence in Kurdistan, abandon our allies, the Kurds, and hand them essentially to the Russians. Mark Esper, Rex Tillerson, David Shukin, Tom Price, Ryan Zink, right? All of them were fired by Trump, essentially for saying things like, I think you're making a mistake. Right? Then he criticizes Biden for a while for what I think is actually fair, not ever switching secretaries of defense. But again, it makes sense because it's not clear Biden had a great long-term memory. And I don't mean that as an insult. I mean that as a medical fact. So it seems like he may have not realized that Lloyd Austin, as a 70-year-old general, had some shortcomings. But ultimately, the thing that's insane is that to have your best friend drop an op-ed in Politico that says, you're fucking this all up. This is a huge fuck up. In fact, it's so bad that even Republican congressmen, for example, Don Bacon, the representative from Nebraska, said that Pete Hegseth should be canned, which is crazy. But at some point, even Bacon admits, if a Democrat did this, we'd be demanding a scalp. We should be Americans first when it comes to security. All right? And Trump said he's doing a great job. It's fake news. Total fake news. I don't know what else to tell you. Now, I wanted to mention there's one other story that's interesting. It actually coming to us from the Artan unit of the GRU or the HUR, the GUR. But I want to mention that Artan from the GUR is one of the units that's actually benefiting from the UAO's Double Down fundraiser. Guys, we are so close to matching our goal, right, of $500,000 raised for a whole host of units in Ukraine, but particularly the Artan. This is their version of the CIA's Special Activities Division. And the appeal is that if we can raise, right, we have to raise $250K as Americans, and an anonymous Dutch donor will match the other $250K. So you can see we are so close. So if you want to, now is the time. I'm going to throw the link in the description. Remember, it's tax deductible for us Americans. We're buying these guys advanced jammers, ground drones. I mean, you can follow UAO's YouTube channel where they literally will show the units with the stuff. They'll be like, here are the drones. Here are the jammers. Here are the things you bought us that keep us safe, right? Their transparency is top notch. Again, I literally went around with them in Afghanistan on the Eastern Front, or Ukraine on the Eastern Front, delivering these supplies. They are the real deal, and you should absolutely help them out. So the Artan unit has been busy, right? This is why we're helping them out, because the HUR's Artan unit smoked Russian armor, one of the largest offensives in the South. Now, it probably looked very unusual for the Ukrainian units in the Zaporizhzhia region to suddenly see Ukraine's CIA show up and show up in force. But it seems like maybe they got some intelligence that the Russians were going to be rolling out a large armored assault in the region, right? And so they were waiting for them. The Artan unit said, quote, "For the first time, we are showing epic footage of the destruction of a Russian group that the invaders threw in a breakthrough attempt in the Zaporizhzhia sector." According to the unit, the Russians launched a large-scale assault just before Easter, the Easter truce, right? In Artan's area of responsibility. Again, more than 300 troops, 40 armored combat vehicles, 3 tanks, 10 buggies advance in 6 separate columns. Artan's drone operators and artillery, of course, took them out and thwarted the attack. And so this is, I think, what Artan does best, head out into these areas where there's expected to be high danger, high risk attacks, and deploy advanced tactics with advanced troops. I met these guys. Again, they all, honestly, walking around their base looks like you're outside of an MMA gym. Everybody is jacked. Everybody has big, crazy beards. All these guys wearing just like a mishmash of REI outdoor gear, and of course military uniforms. But they're obviously the real deal, right? When the Russians tried to break in through Zaporizhzhia, they thought maybe the Ukrainians were not paying attention, and Artan showed them what's up. So you know your stuff. Your donations are being put to real work. Now, there's a couple other stories here that I think is interesting. There's this one that the Chinese Ministry of Defense leaked casually that depicted a Chinese J-15 fighter intercepting a U.S. Navy FA-18 Hornet. But the Chinese kind of want us to believe that their fighter jets are can go toe-to-toe with ours. But the date that this was recorded is not really clear, and I think this is Chinese propaganda. But, the other propaganda, of course, as we talked about, Russia's Easter truce, where you might recall Trump had said he's tired of Russia. He's ready to move on from peace talks, ready to move on from the conflict. And if there isn't a peace deal or real progress made in the next couple of days, he was going to walk away. And so Putin announces his Easter ceasefire. Of course, this was just a performance. No Russian combat operations stopped. Supposedly, in a few sectors, there might have been brief pauses to recover bodies. But again, I messaged some of my contacts at the front, and I was like, listen, is this pause happening? And he was like, absolutely not. There is no pause happening. And so clearly, though, the president was just blowing smoke, because despite making no concrete steps to improve the moves towards a ceasefire. In fact, the only people that actually agreed to a ceasefire were the Ukrainians, who said, hey, Easter ceasefire, great, we accept, let's extend it 30 days, right? And of course, the Russians were like, how about we just put this ceasefire in the shredder? And so then, right, President Trump changing his tune, suggesting a peace deal between Moscow and Kiev could be reached this week. That's not going to happen. Again, Putin himself, the Kremlin, is saying the topic is complex. There's going to be no negotiations happening in the short term. Right? They turned down a U.S.-Ukrainian proposal for a full unconditional ceasefire. Russian autocrat Vladimir Putin declared his Easter truce. But here's where things are more interesting. The Ukrainian negotiators are going to travel to London on Wednesday for ceasefire negotiations between them and European partners, trying to move forward as constructively as possible. The plan might include U.S. recognition of Crimea as Russian territory, Ukrainian commitment to remain outside of NATO's defensive alliance forever, right? And, of course, the creation of a demilitarized zone around the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant under American oversight. The Ukrainians will gain nothing, and Russia, of course, will not really face any consequences for getting all these and then resuming the war. And, again, this seems like more non-starters, right? More handing Russia a victory. And here's the thing to point out, is that these are things that the president has already said. The president already said Ukraine's never going to be a NATO member. And so, therefore, it's fair to conclude that if NATO membership was the thing that caused the war, then why would the war need to persist? Putin achieved his objective. He deterred membership of Ukraine in NATO, right? And just to confirm the administration's unbelievable naivete around Putin is that Witkoff is expected to visit Moscow this week. That's right. So what happens is Vladimir Putin can literally lie to the president's face, lie right through his teeth, and the president will be like, "Please, Daddy, more." It's like comical. It's like comical how pathetic he is. And here's what's also sort of extra pathetic is that Trump is just truthing up a storm on his social media about how, ask the Houthis, we put those Houthis in their place. It's like, guys, America you don't need us to destroy the Houthis. You don't need us to destroy a random Yemeni tribe of like maybe 6,000 people. That is not like, okay, I get it. The Red Sea needs to stay open. Sure, fine, got it. But like the American military, we spend trillions on this thing to deter other global powers. And the fact that we are just jerking ourselves off how great we're doing at killing tribes, which, by the way, as we talked about, the Houthis are not out of the fight. They're still shooting down Reaper drones. They're still shooting at French frigates, sending drones at them, right? So we're not really defeating the Houthis, but we love to brag about how we are. But when it comes to actual bullies, actual other militaries, the things that we ostensibly build our military to fight, the Russians, the Chinese, we're just behaving so spinelessly. And again, this isn't like singular. The Biden administration has a lot of culpability here. But the level of kowtowing to Russia that the Trump administration has done is beyond the pale. It's utterly insane, right? And of course, Trump, I want to share with you guys this final quote from Trump before we get out of here. He says, quote, "I'll be giving you full details over the next 3 days. We had very good meetings on Ukraine and Russia," Trump said. "There's a very good chance to reach a ceasefire." Which again, there was no ceasefire. It was a Russian trick. And yet somehow President Trump just reality just does not penetrate. He lives in the world he wants to believe, not the real one that exists. Anyway, guys, that's all I had. Thank you to Martin Baum, Chris Rossi, Stuart Abel, Daniel Brown, Sergei Zinchenko, Chris Holmes, Chris Gorsuch, Daniel Ida Skycall, all of our lieutenant tier members. I could not do it without you guys. And I hope you enjoyed today's video. It was actually kind of wild over on combatvetnews.com. Cheers.